The young son of the millionaire lived locked away, hiding his burned face, until the housekeeper saw beyond the scars and gave him courage. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. The March sun poured its golden light over the mansions of Beverly Hills, an affluent neighborhood in Los Angeles, where the green of Griffith Park meets the blue of the ocean. Among the residences of impressive architecture, the house of Richard Taylor stood out, a magnate in the hotel industry, who had built his empire with luxury resorts scattered along the California coast. The three-story mansion, with its travertine marble facade and gardens that looked straight out of a decor magazine, was the perfect symbol of the success he flaunted to the world. However, within those high walls and electronic gates, a heavy silence resided, contrasting with the constant hustle of Richard's business dealings. On the top floor of the house, isolated like a prisoner in his own tower, lived Michael, the 8-year-old only child of the couple. The boy spent his days confined in the penthouse, a luxurious yet sterile environment where large windows offered a panoramic view of the city he rarely had permission to explore. "Young Master Michael needs to finish his math exercises before lunch," announced Sarah, the middle-aged housekeeper who had run the household's routine with military rigidity for over 15 years. She ascended to the top floor promptly at 9 in the morning, carrying a tray with breakfast and a detailed list of the day's activities. Her footsteps echoed through the marble corridor, momentarily breaking the silence that enveloped the floor like a fog. Michael was seated at the grand piano that occupied the center of the private living room, his small fingers gliding over the keys with a precision that surprised anyone who had the rare opportunity to hear him. The music flowed from him like water from a natural spring, complex melodies that blended classical technique with melancholic improvisations that seemed to carry all the loneliness of his 8 years. "Yes, Miss Sarah," the boy replied, not taking his eyes off the sheet music scattered across the piano. A navy blue silk mask covered half of his face, hiding the scars that stretched from his left temple to his jawline, marks from a fire that had forever changed the course of his life 4 years earlier. The psychic housekeeper set the tray on the mahogany table and adjusted the curtains so that natural light wouldn't fall directly on the boy. "Your father made it clear that you should not expose yourself to the sun unnecessarily. Your skin is still sensitive," she said, repeating the words Richard had uttered hundreds of times, as if the scars were an open wound that would never heal. "I know, Miss Sarah. Can I finish this piece first? It's a waltz I'm composing for my mother," Michael asked, turning slightly on the piano stool. His green eyes, a maternal inheritance, sparkled with an intelligence that contrasted with the mask covering him. "5 minutes, no more than that. The English tutor arrives at 10 sharp," replied Sarah, before descending the stairs with the same rigidity with which she had ascended. Michael returned to the music, letting his emotions flow through the keys. Composing was his way of conversing with the outside world, expressing feelings he had no one to share with. Since the accident, when he was only 4 years old, his life had become a predictable routine of private lessons, solitary meals, and endless afternoons gazing out the window at the bustling city below. In those moments at the piano, he imagined himself playing in grand auditoriums, seeing people moved by his music, feeling part of something greater. He mentally sketched the faces of the audience, children his age who could become his friends, adults who would see him as a talented artist, not as a disfigured boy who needed to be hidden from the world. 3 floors below, in the gourmet kitchen that was rarely used for actual cooking, Richard was finishing a video conference with Japanese investors interested in opening a resort in Malibu. At 42, he maintained the imposing posture that had taken him to the top of the hotel market in the USA. graying hair slicked back with gel, an impeccable Italian suit, and a Rolex that cost more than an apartment in downtown Los Angeles adorned a man obsessed with perfection and public image. "I need to ensure everything is in line for the opening of the Santa Monica resort," he murmured to himself, flipping through documents scattered across the granite countertop. Every detail of his ventures was planned to project luxury and exclusivity, characteristics he believed were essential to maintain his market position. Richard avoided looking up, to the floor where his son spent his days. Michael's presence in the house was like a constant reminder of his own failure as a father and protector. On the night of the fire, he and his wife Claire were entertaining foreign investors in the garden of the house, discussing business expansion, while Michael played alone in the living room, near the fireplace that Richard had insisted on keeping lit to impress the guests. When the child's screams echoed through the house, it was already too late. Michael had tried to grab a toy that had fallen behind the fireplace, and his clothing had caught fire. The second-degree burns left permanent marks that, in Richard's eyes, represented not only his son's physical scars, but also the weight of his own guilt and negligence. "Good morning, darling," Claire said, entering the kitchen with delicate steps on the Carrara marble floor. At 36, she maintained the beauty that had made her a famous digital influencer, with over 2 million followers who followed her luxurious life through carefully edited photos. Her face, shaped by regular aesthetic procedures, never revealed the deep sadness she carried since the accident. "Today's meetings are going to run." "Late," Richard replied, without looking up from the documents. "Do you have plans?" "Spa in the morning, photo shoot for the jewelry campaign in the afternoon. I'm having dinner with the girls at Zucca," Claire said, checking her schedule on her phone. Her life had become a series of social and professional commitments that kept her away from home, far from the painful memories that home represented. Neither of them mentioned Michael, as if their son were a forbidden topic in their morning conversations. This silence had become the couple's language, a way to cope with the guilt they both carried, but neither had the courage to verbalize. Up there, Michael finished his waltz and headed to the table where Sarah had left his morning coffee. Cinnamon rolls with imported jam, fresh orange juice and perfectly cut fruits made up a meal that, although nutritious, lacked the affection that should accompany a child's early hours of the day. While eating, Michael looked out the panoramic window and watched the children playing on the beach at Santa Monica. Small, colorful dots running on the golden sand. He imagined what it would be like to feel the sand between his toes, build castles, play beach volleyball, or simply run freely under the Californian sun. These small pleasures, so natural for other children, had become distant dreams for him. The sound of the intercom announced the arrival of the English tutor, yet another private educator in Michael's lonely academic world. The routine would restart, punctual and predictable, but that day, unbeknownst to anyone, something was about to change. A new employee had been hired to clean the lower floors, a simple woman who would bring with her the transformative power of genuine affection and unconditional acceptance. The interstate bus screeched to a halt at the new Rio bus station, bringing with it the smell of diesel and the hopes of dozens of passengers arriving in the wonderful city in search of a better life. Among them, Mary Grace stepped off carrying a worn fiber suitcase and a fabric bag where she kept her few belongings. At 50, her sun-weathered face told the story of a warrior woman who had never surrendered to life's adversities. "My God, what a big city," she murmured, observing the frenetic movement around her. Coming from a small town in Texas, Mary had never seen so many buildings together, so many cars, so many people rushing back and forth, Los Angeles was a world completely different from the village where she had raised 3 children and was now preparing to care for 3 grandchildren after losing her eldest daughter Grace in a tragic bus accident 6 months earlier. With the address noted on a crumpled piece of paper and the directions she had received over the phone, Mary boarded the metro heading to the west side. During the journey, she watched the changes in the urban landscape through the window, from the modest buildings of the north side to the luxurious condos that began to appear as she approached her destination. "Are you really going to work for the rich?" asked a passenger sitting next to her, a young woman who also seemed to come from the countryside, judging by her accent. "Yes, dear. Work is work, and I need to support 3 little grandchildren who are now orphans," Mary replied, adjusting the scarf covering her grey hair. "The woman from the agency said it's a good family that pays on time." The truth was that Mary had no choice. Grace had left 3 small children, Lucy, 10 years, old John, 7, and little Anna Clara, only 5, under her care. The rural pension she received barely covered basic sustenance, and the occasional work as a seamstress in Texas was not enough to raise the children with dignity. When an acquaintance told her about the cleaning job in Los Angeles, she didn't hesitate to sell her few belongings to buy the bus ticket. 2 hours later, Mary stood before the imposing gates of the Taylor mansion. The security guard, a tall and stern man, checked her documents before opening the electronic gate. Walking along the cobblestone driveway lined with palm trees, she felt as if she were entering another planet. "Holy Mary," she whispered, observing the ornamental fountain that adorned the front garden and the marble facade that shone under the afternoon sun. She had never imagined that houses like this really existed, thinking they were just sets from soap operas. Sarah welcomed her at the side entrance designated for staff. The housekeeper, with her impeccable uniform and rigid posture, scrutinized Mary from head to toe with a critical gaze that did not hide a certain disdain. "You must be the new cleaner. I am Sarah, the housekeeper. Here for 15 years. Things work very specifically here, and I expect you to understand that from day one," she said, without any warmth in her voice. "Yes, ma'am. I am Mary Grace, but you can just call me Mary. I came from Texas, and I'm willing to work hard," Mary replied, maintaining the respectful demeanor she had learned throughout her life. Sarah led Mary through the lower floors of the mansion, explaining in detail the cleaning routines. The main living room, with its Italian leather sofas and contemporary art on the walls. The library with mahogany shelves that reached. The ceiling, filled with books that seemed never to have been touched. The dining room with a table for 12 that rarely hosted guests. And the gourmet kitchen equipped with imported appliances that cost more than an entire house in Texas. "Your responsibility is exclusively the ground floor and the first floor," emphasized Sarah, stopping in front of the service elevator. "The second floor is for the family's private use, and you must never, under no circumstances, should you go upstairs. Mr. Richard was very clear about this rule. Any disobedience will result in immediate dismissal." "I understand, Mrs. Sarah. You can rest assured that I am a trustworthy person," replied Mary, although she couldn't hide her curiosity about the reason for such restrictions. "Work starts at 7 in the morning and ends at 5 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. A 45-minute lunch break without exception. Payment is made on the 10th of every month, and delays are not tolerated," continued Sarah, handing her a navy blue uniform. "Put this on and come with me to see the cleaning supply storage." As Sarah explained where the imported cleaning products and modern equipment were located, Mary observed every detail of the house. There was something strange about that environment, an absence she couldn't identify. There were no family photographs, no scattered toys, none of those little messes that make a house a home. Everything was too perfect, too organized, too cold. "Mrs. Sarah, may I ask how many people live here?" Mary inquired while organizing the cleaning cloths on the cart. "Mr. Richard, Mrs. Clare, and—" Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if the next words were difficult to pronounce. "And their son, Michael. He is 8 years old, but he is a special child. He had an accident when he was little and now lives secluded on the top floor. That's why the prohibition against going upstairs." Mary nodded, but something in her heart tightened. An 8-year-old child living in isolation. That didn't seem right to her experienced mother and grandmother's eyes. Throughout her life, she had cared for children and knew that isolation was never the answer to any problem they might have. The first day of work passed quickly. Mary dedicated herself to cleaning with the same diligence she applied to all tasks in life. While she polished the marble floor of the main room, she thought of the grandchildren she had left in a small town in Texas under the care of her younger sister. Louisa, John, and Anna Clara were counting the days until she could settle in Los Angeles and bring them closer to her. In the afternoon, while organizing the books in the library, Mary began to hear sounds coming from the upper floor. First, it was the sound of a piano being played with impressive mastery. The melody was sad and beautiful, filled with an emotion that touched deep in her heart. Then she heard quick footsteps running back and forth, as if a child were playing alone in the hallways. "What talent," she murmured, recognizing the quality of the music, descending the stairs. There was something familiar about those sounds, the same restless energy of her children when they were cooped up at home during heavy rain in the countryside. When Sarah appeared in the library to check her work, Mary couldn't contain her curiosity. "Mrs. Sarah, who is playing the piano up there? It's very beautiful." "It's Michael," Sarah replied curtly. "He has private music teachers. It's one of the few activities that keeps him occupied." "And he never comes down? Never plays in the garden? An 8-year-old child needs sunshine, needs movement," Mary said, unable to hide the concern in her voice. "Mary, on your first day, you're asking too many questions. What happens in this family is none of your business. Focus on your work and forget the rest," Sarah retorted, with a harshness that made it clear the subject was closed. But Mary Grace was not the type to give up easily. Born and raised in the countryside, where solidarity and mutual care were matters of survival, she couldn't accept that a child lived isolated from the world. Something in her maternal instinct told her that there was much more behind that situation than a simple medical necessity. As she finished organizing the library, her hands found something unusual hidden behind a thick volume on hotel management. It was sheets of paper, carefully folded and placed among the books. Curious, she unfolded one of them and nearly let out an exclamation of surprise. It was an extraordinary drawing. A portrait of a smiling woman, rendered with impressive technique for an 8-year-old child. Each line revealed not only exceptional artistic talent, but also a deep sensitivity and a keen observation of human nature. In the lower right corner, it was signed only with the initials MT. Mary quickly tucked the drawing away when she heard Sarah's footsteps approaching again. Her heart raced, but not out of fear. Out of hope. She had found a window into the soul of that mysterious child, and something in her gut told her that her mission in that house went far beyond just cleaning and organizing. At exactly 5 in the afternoon, Mary left the mansion with more questions than answers. During the return trip to the simple boarding house where she had rented a room in Griffith Park, she couldn't shake the melancholic music and the talented drawing she had discovered from her mind. A child with such talent should not live hidden from the world, regardless of any circumstances. That night, before going to sleep, Mary offered a silent prayer asking for wisdom to understand how she could help. She didn't know yet, But her arrival at that mansion would mark the beginning of a transformation that would forever change the lives of everyone living within those tall, silent walls. A week passed since Mary Grace arrived at the Taylor mansion. During this time, she had established a meticulous routine, completing all tasks with exemplary dedication while discreetly observing the family patterns that revealed themselves day after day. The house functioned like a Swiss clock. Richard left at 6:30 in the morning for his business meetings, Claire came down around 10 for her social commitments, and Sarah ran the household routine with military precision. "Mary, today you will do the heavy cleaning of the library. All the books must be taken out, the shelves cleaned, and everything." "Reorganized," ordered Sarah on a Thursday in March, handing him a detailed list of instructions. "And remember, each book must go back exactly to the same place." "Yes, Miss Sarah." "I've got it," replied Mary, grabbing the cleaning cart loaded with specific products for wood and delicate fabrics. The library was one of the most impressive spaces in the mansion. Solid mahogany shelves rose from floor to ceiling, connected by a polished bronze ladder. First editions, leather-bound collections, and artworks decorated the shelves, creating an atmosphere that exuded knowledge and sophistication. Large windows offered views of the gardens, where hired gardeners maintained perfect lawns and flower beds that looked like impressionist paintings. As she carefully removed the books from the first shelf, Mary continued to discover hidden drawings among the volumes. Each new page she found revealed more about the extraordinary talent of the mysterious child from the upper floor. There were detailed landscapes of Central Park, portraits of people that looked like black and white photographs, and scenes of children playing in parks and beaches that demonstrated not only technical skill, but a profound nostalgia for experiences that, apparently, the artist had never lived. "How can a child draw so well?" she murmured to herself, admiring a particularly touching sketch of children flying kites in Central Park. The line work was precise, but there was something in the composition that revealed not only visual observation, but a deep emotional understanding of the joy of childhood. Up there, Michael was finishing his advanced math lesson with the private tutor, a middle-aged man who came 3 times a week to work on concepts that already surpassed the normal school level for his age. The boy demonstrated exceptional intelligence, absorbing knowledge with surprising ease, but always with the distant look of someone learning about the world through books and screens, never through personal experience. "Very well, Michael. You solved the equations with impressive ease. In the next lesson we will work on spatial geometry," said the tutor, organizing his materials. "Mr. Carlos, may I ask something?" Michael said, adjusting the silk mask that covered his scars. "What is it like to study in a real school, with other kids?" The tutor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. He had been instructed by Michael's parents to avoid conversations about social or school life. "Well, Michael, every child has their own learning path. Yours is special, personalized. That is a privilege that few have," he replied diplomatically. "But I want to know what it's like to have friends my age. Sometimes I invent conversations in my head with other kids, but it's not the same," confessed Michael, with an honesty that touched the tutor's heart. After the educator left, Michael headed to the piano. As he always did when he needed to express emotions he didn't know how to process. His compositions had become more complex lately, incorporating harmonies that reflected not only his classical musical training, but also the melancholy of a child who observed the world through windows without being able to participate in it. Downstairs, Mary continued her archaeological discovery among the books. She had found nearly 24 drawings, each revealing different aspects of Michael's personality and dreams. One in particular moved her deeply. It was a self-portrait where the boy had drawn his face divided in half. One side showed the scars in realistic detail, while the other side shone with a radiant smile and eyes full of life. "This boy is not sick," concluded Mary, carefully putting the drawings back among the books. "He is trapped." During lunch, which she had alone in the kitchen while the family followed their individual routines, Mary couldn't shake off everything she had discovered. Richard was having lunch in business meetings, Claire rarely ate at home due to her social commitments, and Michael received his meals in his room, served by Sarah with the punctuality of hospital service. "Ms. Sarah, may I ask why the boy can't eat with the family?" Mary questioned when the housekeeper came down from the upper floor carrying Michael's empty lunch tray. "Mary, I've told you that you asked too many questions. The family has their reasons, and it is not for us to question," replied Sarah, washing the tray with abrupt movements that revealed irritation. "Focus on your work. It's just that where I come from, an isolated child is a sick child, and from the sounds I hear up there, this boy has a lot of talent and energy. He seems healthy," insisted Mary, driven by the genuine concern she felt growing each day. Sarah stopped washing the tray and turned to face Mary with a hard look. "Listen well. What happened to Michael was traumatic for the entire family. He suffered severe burns in a fire when he was 4 years old. The scars are disturbing. Mr. Richard and Ms. Claire are protecting their son from the cruelties of the outside world. You wouldn't understand because you haven't had children to raise." Sarah's statement hit Mary like a slap. The housekeeper didn't know that she had raised 3 children and was now caring for 3 orphaned grandchildren. "I raised 3 children, Ms. Sarah, and now I care for 3 grandchildren who lost their mother. I know very well what it is to love and protect a child," Mary replied, keeping her voice calm but firm. "And I also know that overprotecting sometimes hurts more than the danger outside." Sarah was momentarily speechless, clearly surprised by the revelation. She quickly recovered, resuming her authoritative stance. "Even so, the rules of this house are clear. Michael stays on the top floor for reasons you do not need to understand. End of story." That afternoon, as Mary finished reorganizing the library, a typical tropical storm began to form over Los Angeles. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the first thunder rumbled over the city. The strong wind swayed the palm trees in the garden, and the first rain began to fall with increasing intensity. Around 4 in the afternoon, the storm reached its peak. Lightning streaked across the dark sky, and the deafening sound of thunder made the entire house vibrate. Suddenly, a more intense flash was followed by a crack, and all the lights in the mansion went out. "Power outage," murmured Mary, turning on her phone's flashlight. The emergency generator should have kicked in automatically, but something had failed. It was then that she heard something that made her heart race. A terrified scream coming from the top floor. It was the voice of a scared child, calling for someone in the dark. Michael was up there alone, in complete darkness, during a storm that brought back traumatic memories of the fire. Sarah had gone to deal with generator issues in the basement. Richard was in a meeting outside the house, and Claire was attending a social event in the west side. Mary looked at the stalled elevator, and then at the service stairs leading to the upper floors. For a moment, she hesitated. Disobeying orders could mean losing the job she depended on to support her grandchildren. But another desperate scream from Michael echoed through the house, and all her maternal instincts spoke louder than any fear of consequences. "A scared child is more important than any rule," she told herself, grabbing some candles she kept in her bag and heading up the stairs toward the top floor. When she reached the penthouse, she found Michael huddled in a corner of the room, trembling not only from the cold, but from terror. The scars on his face were more visible in the dim light, but what Mary noticed first were his wide green eyes, filled with fear, as full of life and intelligence as she had imagined from his drawings. "Hi, my angel," she said softly, lighting a candle and approaching, slowly. "Don't be afraid. I'm Mary, I work here. The lights will be back on soon." Michael looked at her in surprise, clearly not expecting to find anyone there. His first reaction was to pull the mask to cover his face better, but Mary approached with such naturalness that he instantly felt safer. "You're not going to leave. You don't think my scars are disgusting?" Michael asked, his small voice revealing years of isolation and shattered self-esteem. Mary sat down beside him on the floor, just as she would with any of her frightened grandchildren. "My dear, everyone has scars. Yours just happened to be on the outside. Now tell me, do you like cornbread cake with fennel? It's a recipe I learned from my grandmother back in a small town in Texas." The unexpected question and Mary's affectionate tone made Michael smile for the first time in a long while. There was something about the presence of this woman that made him feel normal, accepted, loved unconditionally. And so, on a stormy night in the darkness of an isolated room, a friendship began that would forever change the fate of everyone in the Taylor mansion. The lights came back on half an hour later, but Mary remained on the top floor talking with Michael until Sarah discovered their location. The boy had transformed in those few minutes. His eyes sparkled with an excitement he hadn't shown in years, and for the first time since the accident, someone looked at him without pity, horror, or embarrassment. "Mary, what are you doing up here?" Sarah shouted, rushing up the stairs, clearly furious. "I explicitly said this floor is off limits." "The boy was scared and alone during the storm, Miss Sarah. I heard him screaming and came to help," Mary replied calmly, standing up. "Anyone would have done the same. You disobeyed direct orders. That's grounds for immediate dismissal." Sarah looked at Michael as if he were an accomplice to a crime. "And you, Michael, should have stayed silent until a family member arrived." Michael watched the argument with a mix of fascination and fear. He rarely saw anyone confront Sarah's rigid authority, and Mary's courage impressed him deeply. "Miss Sarah, with all due respect, a scared child cannot be left alone in the dark. Where I was raised, that would be considered neglect," Mary said, keeping her voice firm but respectful. "I did nothing but light a candle and talk to him until the lights came back." The housekeeper was about to respond when they heard the sound of the elevator arriving. Richard had returned from the meeting and, noticing the commotion, decided to check personally what was happening. When the doors opened, he appeared with the grim expression of someone who did not tolerate disorder in his perfectly organized home. "What is going on here?" he asked, observing the scene. Mary, standing next to Michael, who looked visibly more relaxed and happy than he usually did around adults. "Mr. Richard, the new employee disobeyed the rules and went up to the restricted floor," Sarah reported immediately. "She claims she came to help Michael during the blackout, but that does not justify breaking protocol." Richard looked at Mary with piercing eyes, assessing her as he did with dubious business partners. At 42, he had learned to read people quickly, identifying threats or opportunities in a matter of seconds. What he saw in that simple woman from the countryside, however, perplexed him. There was a moral strength in her gaze that he rarely encountered in the corporate world. "Ma'am," he hesitated, realizing he didn't even know the employee's name. "Mary Grace, sir, and I'm sorry for the confusion, but when I heard your son screaming in fear in the dark, I couldn't just ignore it," Mary said, looking directly into Richard's eyes without flinching. "Michael shouldn't have screamed," Richard said, casting a disapproving glance at his son, who immediately lowered his head in shame. "With all due respect, Mr. Richard, any 8-year-old would scream in fear in a situation like this. It's natural and healthy," Mary replied, surprising everyone with her boldness. "The boy is intelligent, well-mannered, and very talented. It would be a shame to waste that by keeping him locked away." The comment Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. No one dared to question his decisions about raising his son, especially not a newly hired employee. But there was something in the direct and honest way Mary spoke that made him hesitate before unleashing his usual fury. "You don't understand the situation," Richard said, controlling his tone. "Michael has special needs due to the circumstances of the accident. Keeping him protected is necessary." "Protected from what, sir? The world? Other people?" Mary stepped forward, driven by a courage that came from decades of caring for children. "That boy needs human contact, friendship, normal childhood experiences." Michael listened to the conversation in silence, but his heart raced. For the first time in 4 years, someone was defending his right to live like a normal child. Mary's words echoed feelings he had kept buried deep inside, afraid to express them and disappoint his parents even more. "Dad," Michael said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "I would like to have friends. I feel very lonely here." His confession hit Richard like cold rain. All these years he had convinced himself that he was protecting Michael from the cruelties of the outside world, but he had never really asked what the boy wanted or felt. Sarah, realizing that the situation was slipping out of her control, tried to restore order. "Mr. Richard, this employee is clearly overstepping her boundaries. I suggest she be fired immediately before she causes more problems." But before Richard could respond, Claire's voice echoed through the elevator. She had arrived early from the social event, intrigued by the confusing messages Sarah had sent about issues with the new employee. "Richard, what's happening up here?" Claire asked, appearing in the room in her designer dress and heels echoing on the marble floor. When she saw the scene, Mary standing protectively over Michael, Sarah furious, and Richard visibly conflicted, Claire felt a pang of something she hadn't felt in years, genuine curiosity about what was happening in her son's life. "Mom!" exclaimed Michael, running toward her with an excitement Claire hadn't seen since before the accident. "This is Miss Mary. She knows cake recipes and said that the marks on my face aren't scary." The naturalness with which Michael spoke about his scars shocked Claire. For 4 years, this had been a forbidden topic in the family, always treated with euphemisms and awkward silences. "Miss Claire," Mary said, giving a slight respectful bow, "I am Mary Grace, the new cleaning staff. I met your son today during the blackout, and I can say that you have an extraordinary boy." Claire watched Mary closely. There was something in the woman's demeanor that awakened a distant memory of when she herself was younger and had dreams beyond social media fame. Mary radiated an authenticity that Claire had lost amid filters, cosmetic procedures, and manufactured lives for digital consumption. "Michael seemed happy when he ran to me," Claire commented, almost speaking to herself. "I haven't seen him like that in a long time." "It's because Miss Mary treats me like a normal person, Mom. She doesn't look at my scars with pity," Michael said, unaware of how his words struck his parents like precise arrows. Richard and Claire exchanged glances filled with guilt and recognition. For years, they had projected their own traumas and shames onto their son, convincing themselves that isolation was protection when, in fact, it was a way for them to avoid dealing with the consequences of their negligence. "Mr. Richard, Miss Claire," Mary said, sensing there was a window of opportunity to plant a seed of change. "Can I suggest something? Michael has exceptional artistic talent. I found some of his drawings among the books in the library, and they are the work of a true genius. This shouldn't be hidden." "You saw my drawings?" Michael asked, his eyes shining with a mix of emotion and nervousness. "Yes, my angel. They are beautiful. You have a gift that could bring joy to many people," Mary replied, smiling at him with genuine pride. Claire felt something stirring in her chest, a maternal feeling she had buried under layers of guilt and emotional escape. For 4 years, she had avoided truly looking at her son, but Mary's words forced her to see Michael as he really was, a talented and sensitive child who needed love, not pity. "I would like to see those drawings," Claire said, surprising everyone, including herself. Sarah, realizing she was completely losing control of the situation, made one last attempt to restore the order she knew. "Ladies and gentlemen, this employee is clearly manipulating the situation. Michael has always been well cared for, following our established routines. Sudden changes can be harmful." But Mary, strengthened by Michael's positive reaction and the genuine curiosity she saw in Claire's eyes, decided to reveal something she had discovered that would forever change the dynamics of that family. "Miss Sarah, with all due respect, a child locked away is not a protected child, and there is something you all need to know." Mary paused, took a deep breath, and looked directly at Richard. "I researched modern treatments for burn scars. There are surgical techniques and therapies that can significantly improve Michael's appearance and self-esteem. Are you aware of these options?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richard paled, Claire covered her mouth with her hand, and even Sarah looked visibly shaken. For 4 years, everyone had accepted the scars as a permanent sentence, without questioning if alternatives existed. Michael looked from one adult to another, realizing for the first time that perhaps there was hope beyond the confinement he knew. And Mary Grace, a simple woman from a small town in Texas, had just opened a door that everyone believed was permanently closed. Mary's revelation about modern treatments for scars lingered in the air. The air was thick with tension, like a ticking time bomb ready to explode. Richard felt the ground shift beneath his feet. For 4 years, he had built a fortress of justifications for why Michael needed to stay hidden, but he had never truly investigated whether there were advanced medical solutions. "How dare you question medical decisions that are beyond your expertise?" Richard exploded, his voice echoing through the penthouse. "You're a housekeeper, not a doctor. You have no knowledge to comment on my son's treatment." "Dad, please," Michael tried, frightened by his father's aggressive tone. "Richard, lower your voice," Claire said, surprising everyone. It was the first time in years that she publicly confronted her husband. The woman asked a valid question. Why have we never explored these possibilities? Mary stood her ground, despite the hostility radiating from Richard. Her decades of caring for children and facing adversity in rural Texas had taught her that some battles were worth any risk. "Mr. Richard, I'm not a doctor, but I am a mother and a grandmother. And when a child suffers, we seek every possible way to help," Mary said, looking directly into his eyes. "I researched online from the guest house where I'm staying. There are hospitals here in Los Angeles, like the National Institute of Traumatology and Orthopedics, that perform reconstructive surgeries on children. Why has Michael never been evaluated?" The question hit Richard like a slap to the face. The truth was that after the emergency surgeries that saved Michael's life shortly after the accident, he and Claire had focused on hiding the problem instead of seeking solutions. Guilt, shame, and fear of social judgment had paralyzed their ability to think like protective parents. "The doctors at the time said," Richard stammered, realizing that his justifications sounded weak even to his own ears. "What exactly did the doctors say at the time?" Claire insisted, her voice laden with emotion she had repressed for years. "Because I don't remember any of them saying that Michael should live isolated for the rest of his life." Sarah, seeing her position of authority in the house being questioned from all sides, tried a different strategy. "Ms. Claire, Mr. Richard has always wanted to protect Michael from the cruelties of the world. People can be very cruel to children who are different," she said, carefully choosing her words. "Different how?" Michael asked, his voice small but firm. It was the first time he openly questioned the narrative that had shaped his life. I draw well, play the piano better than many adults, and can solve equations that kids my age don't even know. Why does that make me less worthy of having friends? Michael's words fell on the adults like rain on dry earth. Claire felt tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, she was truly hearing her son express his feelings and desires. Michael is right, Mary said, moving closer to the boy in a protective gesture. He is special for his talent, intelligence, and sensitivity. The scars are just marks on the skin. They don't define who he is inside. Richard felt cornered. For years, he had convinced himself that he was protecting Michael, but the direct questions forced him to confront an uncomfortable truth. He was protecting himself from guilt, from judgmental looks, from the responsibility of having caused the accident that changed his son's life. "You don't understand," Richard shouted, completely losing control. "You weren't there when it happened. You didn't see the burns, didn't hear the screams, didn't spend months in the hospital watching your son fight for his life." "Richard!" Claire tried to intervene, but he continued. "We were distracted with business, with important guests, and Michael was playing alone near the fireplace. By the time we realized, it was too late. Do you think it's easy to live with that every day?" The outburst revealed more than Richard intended. Mary, with her intuitive wisdom, immediately understood the toxic family dynamic that had established itself after the accident. "Mr. Richard," she said softly, "you are not protecting Michael. You are punishing yourself and punishing him along with you. The guilt of the accident won't lessen by keeping your son trapped. It will only waste his life." "Mom," Michael said, approaching Claire with a courage he hadn't shown in years, "I don't want to hide anymore. I want to go to school, have friends, show my drawings. The scars are part of me, but they're not all that I am." Claire knelt down to her son's level and for the first time since the accident looked directly at the scars without looking away. What she saw were not horrible marks, but the strength of a child who had survived and grown despite all adversities. "You're right, my love," she said, hugging Michael with an intensity they both had forgotten existed. "Mom was cowardly, Dad was cowardly, but we don't have to keep being." Sarah, realizing that her authority was completely undermined, made a last desperate attempt to maintain the status quo. "Ladies and gentlemen, sudden changes can be traumatic for Michael. He's adapted to the current routine. It's dangerous to alter—" "Miss Sarah," Mary interrupted, with a firmness that surprised the housekeeper. "Trauma is not a child living a normal life. Trauma is keeping a healthy child trapped as if he were a dirty secret." The comment hit everyone like lightning. Richard looked at Michael, really looked, perhaps for the first time in years, and saw not a disfigured boy who needed to be hidden, but an intelligent and talented child who had been deprived of his own childhood. "There's something else you need to know," Mary said, taking a deep breath. The moment had come to reveal the most impactful discovery she had made. "Ms. Sarah told me that the accident happened because Michael tried to grab a toy behind the fireplace, but I researched child safety, and an unprotected fireplace in a house with small children is clear negligence." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Richard and Claire knew that Mary was right, but hearing the word negligence spoken aloud forced them to confront a truth they had buried under layers of guilt and denial. "You are not monsters," Mary continued, softening her tone. "You are parents who made a mistake and have spent 4 years punishing yourselves for it, but Michael shouldn't pay the price for your guilt." Michael watched his parents with attentive eyes, seeing them in a way he had never seen before, not as distant and unreachable figures, but as imperfect people who had lost themselves in their own suffering. "Mom, Dad," he said softly, "I forgive you for the accident, but I don't want to forgive if you keep holding me prisoner because of it." Michael's words were like a key that unlocked years of repressed emotions. Claire began to cry, tears of pain, but also of relief. Richard felt his emotional armor crumbling, confronted by the extraordinary maturity of his son, whom he had underestimated for so long. "What do you suggest?" Richard asked Mary, his voice now devoid of the previous arrogance. "First, take Michael to a specialist in reconstructive surgery, not because the scars are unacceptable, but because he has the right to know all his options," Mary replied. "Second, start slowly introducing him to the real world. Let him interact with other children in a controlled and safe environment." "And how will we do that?" Claire asked, wiping her tears. Mary smiled for the first time since the discussion had begun. "I have 3 grandchildren in a small town in Texas who would love to meet a friend as special as Michael. How about we start with a video call?" And so, on a night that had begun with a storm and almost ended with a dismissal, the Taylor family took the first step toward healing wounds that went far beyond the visible scars on Michael's face. 3 weeks passed since the confrontation that changed the dynamics of the Taylor family. The mansion, which had functioned as a silent mausoleum for years, was beginning to show signs of life. Michael was no longer confined exclusively to the upper floor. His meals now took place in the dining room, where hesitant yet genuine conversations began to replace the awkward silences that had dominated the family table. "Michael, the doctor will explain the possibilities of reconstructive surgery today," Claire said during breakfast, watching her son's reaction closely. She had lost 15 pounds in the past few weeks, a result of anxiety and guilt, but also of a renewed energy that came from reconnecting with her maternal role. "Mum, I want to know about the options, but I don't want to do anything just to please other people," Michael replied, delicately cutting a slice of papaya. His emotional maturity continued to surprise his parents. "If I decide to have the surgery, it will be because I want to, not because people feel uncomfortable looking at me." Richard almost choked on his coffee. His 8-year-old son's moral clarity constantly embarrassed him, reminding him of how he had lost his way during all those years of self-imposed isolation. "Of course, son. The decision is yours," Richard said, trying to sound convincing despite his still trembling voice. Accepting that Michael had autonomy over his own choices was a completely new concept for him. Mary entered the dining room carrying a tray of fresh fruit. In recent weeks, her role in the house had naturally transformed. Besides cleaning duties, she had become the family's confidant, conflict mediator, and most importantly, the bridge between Michael and the outside world he was gradually discovering. "Good morning, family," Mary said, with the warm smile that had become the emotional thermometer of the house. "Michael, your friends from Texas are excited for the video call this afternoon. Louisa drew a portrait of you based on the photo I sent." Michael's eyes lit up. The weekly video calls with Mary's grandchildren had become the highlight of his routine. Louisa, 10, Joan, 7, and Anna Clara, 5, treated him with absolute normalcy, interested in his drawings and music, asking questions about his life in Los Angeles without any embarrassment about his scars. "Miss Mary, can I ask if they would like to receive some of my drawings by mail?" Michael asked, shy but hopeful. "They would be over the moon, my angel. Especially Anna Clara, who is starting to draw and thinks of you as a famous artist," Mary replied, arranging the fruit in the center of the table. Claire watched the interaction between Mary and Michael with a mix of gratitude and envy. The ease with which the housekeeper connected with her son painfully contrasted with the years of distance she had created herself. "Mary," Claire said hesitantly, "I would like to join the video call today. I want to meet your grandchildren and learn how to talk to children normally." Claire's confession revealed the depth of her insecurity. For 4 years, she had avoided not only her own son, but any situation involving children, as if motherhood were a club from which she had lost the right to participate after the accident. "Of course, Miss Clare. The children love meeting new people, and I'm sure they will like you very much," Mary replied, sensing the vulnerability behind the request. Sarah entered the dining room with her usually rigid posture, but something had changed in her behavior. In recent weeks, her absolute authority had been questioned, and she was still adjusting to the new family dynamic. "Mr. Richard, the driver is waiting to take Michael to the hospital. The appointment with the plastic surgeon is scheduled for 10 o'clock, she announced, avoiding looking directly at Michael. The relationship between Sarah and the boy had become strange. For years, she had been his only constant adult companion, but always keeping emotional distance and reinforcing the isolation rules imposed by his parents. Now, with Mary taking on the role of confidant and advocate for Michael, Sarah, she felt out of place and secretly jealous. "Thank you, Sarah," said Richard, getting up from the table. "Michael, are you ready to meet the doctor?" "I am, Dad, but I want Miss Mary to come with me," said Michael, surprising everyone. "She helps me feel brave." The request caused a moment of tension. Traditionally, medical appointments were a matter exclusive to parents, but Michael had developed a healthy emotional dependence on Mary that transcended domestic hierarchies. "Of course, my love," said Claire, before Richard could protest. "Mary, would you mind accompanying us? Your presence would be important for Michael." Mary hesitated, aware that she was treading on delicate ground. "If you all think it's appropriate, I would be honored to accompany," she replied diplomatically. Central Park Hospital was one of the most reputable hospitals in Los Angeles, specializing in reconstructive surgeries. Dr. Edward Miller, the plastic surgeon who had agreed to evaluate Michael, had over 20 years of experience with complex burn cases in children. In the waiting room, Michael held Mary's hand while observing other children and adults waiting for their appointments. It was one of the few times in his life that he was in a public space with others who also had visible physical differences. "Look, Michael," whispered Mary, discreetly pointing to a girl about 12 years old who was reading a magazine. "She also has scars, but she's here calmly reading normally. Did you see how people aren't staring or making faces?" Michael watched closely. The girl indeed had extensive scars on her arm and neck, but no one in the waiting room seemed disturbed or uncomfortable. People were chatting normally, children were playing, and life continued its natural course. "People aren't as cruel as I imagined," murmured Michael, more to himself than to the others. "Most people are good, my love," replied Claire, surprised by her own ability to comfort him. "We are the ones who create monsters in our imagination." When they arrived at Dr. Miller's office, Michael immediately felt at ease. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a well-groomed grey beard, greeted Michael as he would any patient, without dramatizations or expressions of pity. "Hi, Michael. I'm Dr. Edward. I heard you're a talented artist and an exceptional musician," said the doctor, sitting in a chair at Michael's height, instead of remaining behind the imposing desk. "How did you know?" asked Michael, immediately interested. "Your parents told me about your talents when they scheduled the appointment. I also draw in my spare time, although I'm not as good as you, from what I've heard," replied Dr. Miller, establishing a genuine connection before addressing any medical issues. During the consultation, which lasted nearly 2 hours, Dr. Miller explained in detail the options available to improve the appearance of Michael's scars: skin graft surgeries, laser treatments, stem cell therapies, technologies that simply didn't exist or weren't widely available at the time of the accident. "The important thing," emphasized the doctor, "is that Michael understands these are options, not obligations. He can live a completely normal and happy life just as he is." The surgeries would only serve to improve his self-esteem if that's what he wants. Michael asked intelligent questions about the procedures, demonstrating a maturity that impressed the doctor. By the end of the consultation, he had decided that he did want to undergo at least one surgery to soften the most visible scars, but not out of shame or external pressure. "I want to do it because I think I'll feel more confident, not because the scars are ugly, but because I want to have the option to choose how I want to look," Michael explained, with a wisdom that left all the adults present moved. On the way home, in the car, the family felt closer than they had in years. Michael excitedly talked about the possibility of having the surgery during the upcoming school break, showing a positive anxiety about the future that contrasted completely with the melancholic resignation of the past 4 years. "Michael," said Richard, looking in the rearview mirror, "would you like to visit some schools before deciding where to study next semester?" The question represented a fundamental shift in Richard's mindset. For the first time, he was not trying to protect Michael from the world, but preparing him to participate in it. "Really, Dad? I can choose the school?" asked Michael, his eyes shining with excitement. "Of course, son. The decision is yours. We want you to feel comfortable and happy," replied Claire, still getting used to this new version of herself as an active and present mother. Mary, sitting next to Michael in the back seat, smiled silently. The seed she had planted that stormy night was beginning to bloom, transforming not only Michael's life, but the entire family that had lost itself in its own pain. When they arrived home, Michael ran straight to his room to prepare some special drawings he wanted to show his friends from a small town in Texas during the afternoon video call. For the first time in 4 years, he was eager to share his talents with the world, and the future seemed filled with infinite possibilities. A radical change was happening in the Taylor mansion, but not everyone was happy with the transformation. Sarah watched from afar the growing influence of Mary over the family with a mix of resentment and fear. For 15 years, she had been the ultimate authority over the household routine, controlling every aspect of family life with an iron fist. Now, a simple woman from the countryside threatened all the power she had carefully built over the years. "This situation is completely getting out of control," Sarah murmured to herself, watching through the kitchen window as Mary and Michael played in the garden. It was a Friday afternoon, and for the first time since the accident, Michael was outside the house without his protective mask, drawing flowers while Mary told him stories from the Texas countryside. The housekeeper had tried several subtle strategies to undermine Mary's influence, deliberately reorganizing the schedule. Sarah had tried everything from cleaning to overburdening her, criticizing her work in front of the employers, and even attempting to convince Richard that rapid changes could be detrimental to Michael. But all her maneuvers had failed in the face of the evident results. Michael was happier, more confident, and healthier than he had been in years. "Sarah?" Claire said, entering the kitchen with an energy that the housekeeper hadn't seen in a long time. "I need you to organize a birthday party for Michael next month. He will turn 9, and for the first time, we want to celebrate properly." The request hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. For the past 4 years, Michael's birthdays had been melancholic events, a store-bought cake, some expensive gifts, and a forced celebration that felt more like a wake. The idea of a real party with guests meant that the family was officially abandoning the isolation policy that Sarah had helped maintain. "A party, Miss Claire? With how many people?" Sarah asked, trying to hide the irritation in her voice. "We're thinking of something intimate. Maria's grandchildren would come from a small town in Texas to meet Michael in person. Some neighbors with kids his age, maybe 10 or 15 people," Claire explained, her eyes shining with an excitement that Sarah hadn't seen since before the accident. Ms. Clare, with all due respect, Michael is still adjusting to these changes. A party could be traumatic, with so many strangers looking at him, Sarah argued, using the same overprotective strategy that had always worked in the past. Sarah, Claire said firmly, Michael has expressed the desire to have a normal party. We are going to make that dream come true. The housekeeper realized she had completely lost her influence over Claire. The employer who had delegated all household decisions for years was now taking an active role in her own son's life. That afternoon, while Mary helped Michael prepare for his first group video call with potential schoolmates, an initiative by Dr. Miller to socially prepare him, Sarah made a drastic decision. If she couldn't undermine Mary through subtle methods, she would need to use more direct strategies. "Mary," Sarah said, approaching her in the library where she was helping Michael organize a portfolio of his drawings, "I need to speak with you privately." Mary looked at Michael, who was focused on selecting his favorite works. "Michael, I'll talk quickly with Miss Sarah. Keep choosing the drawings you want to show the kids this afternoon," Mary said, following the housekeeper to the kitchen. "Listen carefully," Sarah said as soon as they were alone, completely abandoning the facade of cordiality. "You are meddling in matters you do not understand. This family has complex dynamics that you, a simple woman from the countryside, cannot comprehend." Mary observed Sarah calmly, recognizing the signs of someone desperate to maintain control. "Ms. Sarah, I don't understand why my presence bothers you so much. I'm just helping Michael to be happy." "Happy?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "Do you think you know this family better than I do, who has worked here for 15 years? Michael has always been well cared for. He had routine, security, protection." "He had imprisonment," Mary gently corrected. "An 8-year-old child locked at home is not protection, it's cruelty." The word cruelty hit Sarah like a slap. All these years, she had convinced herself that she was protecting Michael from the evils of the outside world, but Mary's direct accusation forced her to confront the possibility that her motivations were more selfish. "You don't understand because you weren't here during the accident," Sarah said, changing her strategy. "You didn't see the state Michael was in when he arrived at the hospital. You didn't hear the doctors saying it might be better if he didn't survive due to the extent of the burns." Mary felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in the way Sarah spoke that suggested a deeper knowledge of the accident than she had previously revealed. "What do you mean by, 'it might be better if he didn't survive'?" Mary asked, her maternal intuition sensing that more information was being withheld. Sarah realized she had said too much but decided to continue. If she was going to lose her position of power, she would at least reveal truths that could shake the new family harmony. "The doctors were very clear at the time. Michael would have permanent consequences, not just physical but possibly neurological. They said he could have cognitive difficulties, coordination problems, and that a normal life would be impossible," Sarah said, watching Mary's reaction closely. "But Michael is clearly intelligent, talented, and coordinated. He plays the piano beautifully, draws like a prodigy," Mary replied, confused. "Exactly. He has surpassed all medical expectations. But Richard and Claire were so traumatized by the initial predictions that they never accepted that their son had fully recovered," Sarah explained, inadvertently revealing the depth of the family dysfunction. Mary began to understand the complexity of the situation. Michael's parents were not just dealing with guilt over the accident. They were mourning a son they thought they had lost, even though he was alive and well in front of them. "Miss Sarah, do you realize that this information proves exactly what I'm saying? Michael should have been living a normal life for years." "No!" Sarah exploded. "You don't understand. If Michael goes out into the world and something happens to him, if someone hurts him or rejects him, Richard and Claire won't survive. They almost destroyed themselves once." The confession revealed Sarah's true motivation. She was not protecting Michael. She was protecting his parents from facing new traumas, even if it meant sacrificing the boy's childhood and adolescence. "So, you think it's fair for Michael to pay the price for his parents' emotional fragility?" Mary asked, her voice heavy with controlled indignation. "It's more complicated than that," Sarah murmured, realizing how her justification sounded when verbalized. "No, it isn't," Mary replied firmly. "A child should not be responsible for taking care of their parents' emotional well-being. That is the opposite of motherhood and fatherhood." Sarah fell silent for a few moments, confronted with the moral simplicity of Maria's argument. For 15 years, she had built a complex structure of justifications to maintain the status quo, but the woman from the countryside had exposed the fundamental cruelty of the system in a few direct sentences. "And what do you suggest?" Sarah asked, her voice now devoid of the previous hostility. "That I simply abandon a family I have cared for over the past 15 years. "I suggest you help Michael grow instead of keeping him imprisoned," Maria replied. "You can be part of the solution or part of the problem. The choice is yours." At that moment, they heard laughter coming from the library. Michael was animatedly talking to someone over a video call, his voice filled with genuine joy. "Listen to this," Maria said, smiling. "This is the sound of a happy child. Do you want to keep trying to silence that joy?" Sarah looked in the direction of the library, where Michael's laughter echoed through the house like music. For the first time in years, she truly heard the happiness in the boy's voice and realized how much she had contributed to suppressing it. I just wanted to protect him," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "I know," Maria replied gently. "But true protection is preparing someone for the world, not hiding them from it." The conversation was interrupted when Michael appeared in the kitchen doorway, radiant with emotion. "Miss Mary, Miss Sarah, you won't believe it. I talked to 3 kids who will be studying at the same school as me next semester. They loved my drawings, and one of them plays piano too. We're going to form an art study group." Michael's pure joy hit Sarah like a ray of light. For the first time in 4 years, she was seeing the boy as a normal child, full of dreams and possibilities, instead of a fragile patient who needed to be protected. "That's wonderful, Michael," Sarah said, surprising herself with the sincerity of her emotion. Maria smiled, recognizing the first sign that Sarah's resistance was beginning to dissolve. The transformation of the Taylor family was far from complete, but another barrier had fallen on Michael's path to freedom. Saturday dawned sunny, with that blue Los Angeles sky that seemed to have been painted especially for important moments. Michael woke up at 6 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual, with a mix of anxiety and excitement he hadn't felt since before. The accident. Today would be the day of his first in-person meeting with other children in 4 years. Maria's grandchildren had arrived from a small town in Texas the night before and would spend the afternoon at the mansion. "Good morning, my love," said Claire, entering her son's room and finding him already dressed and carefully combing his hair. She had slept poorly, worried about how Michael would react to his first real social contact, but seeing the determination in his eyes filled her with a wave of maternal pride she hadn't experienced in years. "Mum, do you think they will like me?" Michael asked, adjusting a blue t-shirt that highlighted his green eyes. For the first time, he had chosen not to wear a mask, a brave decision that represented a milestone in his journey of self-confidence. "I'm sure they will adore you, my dear. How could they not?" Claire replied, kissing her son's forehead. "You are talented, smart, funny. The scars are just a small part of who you are." On the first floor, Maria was in the kitchen preparing a table of treats she had carefully planned for the gathering. homemade brownies, cornbread with fennel, the recipe she had promised to teach Michael, chicken croquettes made from scratch, and fresh cashew juice, flavors from the Northeast she wanted to share with the Los Angeles family that had adopted her heart. "Mr. Richard," said Richard Taylor, entering the kitchen wearing jeans and a polo shirt instead of his usual designer suit. "I need to confess that I'm nervous. It's been so long since Michael has interacted with other children that I don't know how he will react." "Mr. Richard, children are natural beings. They don't have the prejudices of adults. Your grandchildren will treat Michael like any new friend," Maria replied, placing the brownies in colorful wrappers. "You will be surprised by the simplicity of childhood friendship." Sarah appeared in the kitchen carrying fine china plates, her silent contribution to making the gathering special. In the past few weeks, after the revealing conversation with Maria, the housekeeper had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. She still maintained her characteristic efficiency, but now directed that energy to support Michael's socialization instead of sabotaging it. "The gardens are ready for play, and I've organized an area with art supplies on the porch," announced Sarah, surprising everyone with her positive initiative. At 2 in the afternoon, Maria went out to pick up the grandchildren from a distant cousin's house in Griffith Park, where they had spent the night. During the drive back, she prepared the children for the meeting. "Lucy, John, Anna Claire, remember what we talked about. Michael is a special boy who hasn't had many opportunities to play with other children. Be kind and natural with him," Maria said, looking through the rear-view mirror of the taxi. "Grandma, can he really draw as well as in the pictures?" asked Lucy, 10 years old, her eyes shining with curiosity. She had become an aspiring artist since she saw Michael's drawings through video calls. "Even better, my dear. And he plays piano like an angel," Maria replied, touched to see the genuine enthusiasm of her grandchildren. "I brought my toy guitar. We can play music together," said John, 7 years old, hugging the homemade instrument he had made from a shoebox and rubber bands. "And I made a drawing of him to give as a gift," added Anna Claire, 5 years old, showing a piece of paper with a colorful drawing of Michael smiling, surrounded by rainbows and butterflies. When they arrived at the mansion, Michael waited at the main entrance with his parents by his side, a sight that completely contrasted with the years of seclusion. Richard had insisted on personally welcoming the children, recognizing the historical significance of that moment. "Hi, Michael!" shouted Anna Claire, jumping out of the taxi and running towards him without any hesitation. At 5 years old, she had no social filters or prejudices. She saw only a new boy to play with. Michael crouched down to her level, and Anna Claire immediately handed him her drawing. "I made this for you. Are you happy?" The simplicity of the child's gesture deeply touched all the adults present. Michael looked at the drawing and smiled with an authenticity that his parents hadn't seen in years. "It's beautiful, Anna Claire. Thank you. I made a drawing for you, too." Lucy and John approached more cautiously, but as soon as Michael began to show some of his drawings that he had brought to share, any initial shyness disappeared. "Wow, you draw better than any adult I know," exclaimed Lucy, closely examining a realistic portrait Michael had made of his own mother. "Can you teach me? I want to learn to draw like that," John asked, completely fascinated by the technique. "Of course, let's go to the porch. I prepared materials for us to draw together," said Michael, leading the group with a confidence that even surprised himself. As the children settled on the porch for their artistic activities, the adults watched from a distance. Claire had tears in her eyes, seeing her son interact naturally with other children for the first time in 4 years. "It's as if he never was isolated," murmured Richard, amazed by Michael's natural social ease. "Children are resilient, Mr. Richard. They adapt faster than we adults," explained Miss Mary, equally moved to see her grandchildren and Michael connecting immediately. Throughout the afternoon, the four children played, drew, made music. John was enchanted by the real piano, and simply were kids. Michael discovered the joy of having an audience for his talents, while Miss Mary's grandchildren learned artistic and musical techniques they had never imagined. "Michael," said Lucy during a snack on the porch, "why did you live only upstairs? Your house is so cool." The direct question, asked without malice, caught Michael off guard. He looked at the adults watching from a distance and then at his friends around him. "I had an accident when I was little that left these marks on my face. My parents thought people would be scared of me," Michael explained, with an honesty that surprised everyone. "That's silly," said John, with the typical frankness of children. "You're cool, you draw super well, play piano. Who cares about a few marks?" "That's true," agreed Anna Claire. "You're our friend now." The simplicity of the children's reactions was like a revelation for Michael. For 4 years he had been conditioned to believe that his appearance would be a reason for rejection and horror, but reality showed something completely different. "Do you really want to be my friends?" Michael asked, his voice filled with hope and vulnerability. "Of course. You're the most talented friend we've ever had," replied Lucy, speaking for all 3 siblings. When it was time to say goodbye at the end of the afternoon, the 4 children had formed a solid friendship based on shared interests and mutual acceptance. Michael had discovered that making friends was much easier than he had imagined, and Miss Mary's grandchildren had gained an extraordinary friend. "Grandma, when can we come back to play with Michael?" asked Anna Claire during the ride home. "And can he come to the small town in Texas during the holidays to see our city?" added John. Miss Mary smiled, seeing that the first test of socialization had been an absolute success. At the mansion, Michael entered the house transformed. He had experienced the pure joy of childhood friendship and discovered that the world was not the hostile and cruel place he had imagined during all those years of isolation. "Mom, Dad," he said during dinner, "can we visit schools tomorrow? I'm excited to meet more kids and make new friends." Richard and Claire exchanged emotional glances. Their son had been reborn before their eyes, and they knew they were finally on the right path to repair the damage of the last 4 years. The first bridge had been built between Michael and the outside world. Now it was just a matter of time before he crossed over completely, leaving behind the invisible walls that had defined his childhood until then. 2 months had passed since the first successful meeting between Michael and Miss Mary's grandchildren. Life in the Taylor mansion had acquired a new and healthy routine. Michael attended social preparation classes 3 times a week, regularly visited Dr. Miller for psychological and medical follow-ups, and his reconstructive surgery was scheduled for the December holidays. For the first time in years, the family was planning for the future with optimism. It was a Thursday in May when everything began to crumble. Michael had been accepted into the International School of Los Angeles, a progressive institution known for its inclusive environment and exceptional arts programs. Enrollment was confirmed for the next semester, and Michael could hardly contain his excitement to start his real school life. "Miss Mary," said Michael in the afternoon, as they finished organizing his art portfolio for the school presentation, "do you think the teachers will like my drawings?" "I absolutely know they will, my dear. You have a rare talent that any educator would be happy to guide," replied Miss Mary, proudly watching the boy's growing confidence. It was in that moment of tranquility that Sarah entered the library with a grim expression that immediately alerted Miss Mary. The housekeeper was carrying a folded newspaper and a sealed envelope, and there was something in her posture that suggested bad news. "Mary, I need to talk to you urgently, in private," said Sarah, casting a meaningful glance at Michael. "Michael, how about you go practice piano? Tomorrow you'll play for the teachers of the school," suggested Mary, sensing the tension in the air. As Michael left the library, Sarah closed the door and turned to Mary with an expression that mixed triumph and malice. The old controlling Sarah had resurfaced. "Read this," she said, extending the newspaper open to an inner page of classifieds. Mary read the highlighted ad in red pen. International School of Los Angeles. Student enrollment cancelled due to false information provided by the family. The institution prioritizes transparency and the safety of all students. "What does this mean?" Mary asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "It means someone contacted the school and revealed details about Michael's troubled past that the family had omitted during the interview," explained Sarah, her voice laden with cruel satisfaction. "What details? Michael has never had behavioral or academic issues." Sarah opened the envelope and pulled out an official letter from the school. According to this correspondence, they received anonymous information that Michael had a history of violent episodes related to the trauma from the accident, that he had assaulted household staff, and that the family was hiding psychiatric reports labeling him as a problem child. Mary felt nauseous. Every word was a malicious lie, but someone had constructed a convincing narrative strong enough to destroy Michael's academic dreams. "This is all a lie. Who would do something like this?" Mary exclaimed, her hands trembling with indignation. "Someone who knows this family very well and knows exactly which buttons to push to cause maximum damage," replied Sarah, and there was something in her tone that made Mary look at her with growing suspicion. "Sarah, you didn't do this. Please tell me it wasn't you," Mary said, although she already knew the answer from the challenging look in the housekeeper's eyes. "I did what was necessary to protect this family from a situation that was spiraling completely out of control," confessed Sarah without remorse. "Michael isn't ready for the outside world. These rapid changes are putting everyone at risk." The confession hit Mary like a punch to the stomach. The woman she had begun to trust, who seemed to finally support Michael's transformation, had cowardly sabotaged all the progress made in recent months. "How could you do this to an innocent child?" Mary shouted, struggling to control her fury. "Michael is finally happy, confident, dreaming of the future, and you destroyed everything." "I saved him from an inevitable public humiliation," Sarah shot back, raising her voice. "Do you think the other kids at school would accept Michael once they saw the scars? It would be a tragedy." "That's a lie, and you know it. He has already proven he can make friends normally with Mary's grandchildren. 3 kids from the countryside who can barely do not represent the real world," Sarah said disdainfully. "This is an elite school with children of businessmen and diplomats. Michael would be torn apart." The discussion was interrupted when they heard footsteps approaching. Michael had returned from music class and heard raised voices coming from the library. When he opened the door, he found the 2 most important women in his new life in an open confrontation. "What's going on?" Michael asked, observing the palpable tension between them. Mary and Sarah exchanged glances, both realizing they would have to explain the situation to Michael somehow. But before either could speak, Richard appeared at the door holding his cell phone with a devastated expression. "Mary, Sarah, Michael, we need to talk, all of us, now," he said, his voice heavy with deep sadness. Claire followed closely behind, clearly shaken. The couple had just received a call from the International School of Los Angeles explaining in detail why Michael's enrollment had been cancelled. "Someone," Richard said, staring intently at Sarah, "contacted the school and made up horrible stories about our son. Stories that could ruin not only his education, but our reputation as a family." Michael looked from one adult to another, trying to understand what was happening. "Dad, what does this mean? Am I not going to be able to study at the school?" The desperation in Michael's voice broke the hearts of everyone present, except for Sarah, who maintained her defensive posture. "Michael, Claire said, kneeling to his level. "Someone lied about you to the school. They said things that aren't true, and that's why they cancelled your enrollment." "But why? I didn't do anything wrong," Michael said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Because some people can't accept change," Mary replied, casting a furious glance at Sarah, "even when that change is for the better." Sarah, realizing that all eyes were on her, decided to fully own her position. "Yes, I was the one who called the school, and I would do it again," she said, shocking everyone with her audacity. "You are playing with fire. Michael isn't ready to face the real world, and when something goes wrong, and it will, you will bitterly regret it." "How dare you!" Richard shouted, completely losing his composure. "How dare you sabotage my son?" "Because I know this family better than anyone," Sarah retorted, years of repressed frustration finally exploding. "You are weak. When Michael is bullied, when he is rejected, when he realizes that the world isn't the fairy tale Mary painted, you will collapse again." "Enough!" Michael shouted, surprising everyone with the strength of his voice. "Stop talking about me as if I'm not here." The 8-year-old stood in the center of the library, trembling with anger and frustration, but with a dignity that embarrassed all the adults present. "Miss Sarah," Michael said, looking directly at the housekeeper, "you lied about me. You said I was violent and dangerous. Why did you do that?" Sarah looked at Michael and for the first time seemed to truly understand the impact of her actions on the child she claimed to protect. I just wanted to protect you, Michael. I wanted to prevent you from getting hurt." "You hurt me," he said. Michael simply said, "More than any child at school could hurt. You took away my dream of having friends and studying like a normal person." Michael's direct accusation hit Sarah like a revelation. For 15 years, she had convinced herself that she was protecting the family, but it was clear that her actions were driven by needs for control and power, not genuine love. "Sarah," Richard said in a cold, controlled voice, "you are fired. I want you to leave this house immediately." "Mr. Richard." Sarah tried, but he interrupted her. "There is nothing you can say. You betrayed our trust and deliberately harmed our son. Our relationship is over." As Sarah left the library to gather her belongings, Michael turned to his parents with a maturity that far exceeded his 8 years. "Dad, Mum, Miss Mary," he said, "I will not give up on having a normal life because of this. If this school doesn't want me, we'll find another. I deserve to be happy, and you deserve to see me happy." His words echoed through the library like a manifesto of emotional independence. Michael had learned not only to dream of freedom, but to fight for it. And in that moment, everyone knew that no sabotage would be enough to interrupt his journey into the outside world. The battle was not over, but Michael had proven to be stronger than anyone had imagined, including himself. 6 months had passed since Sarah's sabotage and the subsequent firing of the housekeeper. What initially seemed like a catastrophe had become the final catalyst for the complete transformation of the Taylor family. Michael had not only secured enrollment at the American School of Los Angeles, an even more prestigious institution than the previous one, but he had also become a local celebrity due to his exceptional artistic talent. It was December, the eve of Michael's 9th birthday, and the mansion in Beverly Hills was buzzing with preparations for a party that symbolized much more than just a celebration. It was the official milestone of a family's rebirth that had lost itself in its own shadows and finally found its way back to the light. "Michael, you need to see this!" Claire shouted, rushing into the living room where her son was finishing framing his latest drawing. A self-portrait, where the scars appeared naturally integrated into his face, no longer hidden or minimized, but accepted as part of his unique identity. "What is it, Mom?" Michael asked. who at 9 years old had visibly grown, not just in height, but in confidence and spirit. The MoMA Los Angeles wants to include 3 of your drawings in an exhibition about art and childhood resilience. They received your portfolio through the school and were impressed, Claire announced, waving the official letter like a trophy. Michael looked at the letter, then at the portrait he had just framed, and smiled with a serene joy that had become his trademark. "That's amazing, Mom. But you know what's even better? I'm not surprised. I always knew my art was special. I just needed people who believed in it with me." Michael's emotional maturity continued to impress everyone around him. The reconstructive surgery he had undergone 2 months earlier had significantly softened the most visible scars. But the real miracle had been internal, the transformation of an isolated and insecure child into a confident young artist who saw his physical marks as symbols of survival, not shame. "Miss Mary!" Michael shouted, running toward the kitchen where she was preparing sweets for the next day's party. "My drawings are going to be in a real museum." Ms. Mary, now officially promoted to housekeeper and personal caregiver for Michael, smiled with the pride of someone who had planted a seed and watched it grow into a lush tree. "I always said you were special, my angel. The whole world is discovering what I already knew," she said, hugging Michael with the genuine affection that had been the catalyst for all the transformation. "And there's more news," Michael said, his eyes shining. "The music teacher at school wants me to perform at the end-of-year concert. I'm going to play an original composition I made about our family, about how different people can help each other grow." Richard appeared at the kitchen entrance, still wearing his office suit, but with a relaxed expression that contrasted completely with the constant tension he had carried for years. In recent months, he had drastically reduced his workload to spend more time with Michael, discovering that being a present father was infinitely more rewarding than building hotel empires. "Michael, I have a surprise for you," Richard announced, holding an elegant envelope. "Remember that resort in Malibu where we're going for vacation? I spoke with the management and they want you to paint a mural in the children's area. It will be your first public artwork." Michael looked at his father with genuine admiration. Richard had transformed from a man obsessed with public image into a father who used his professional connections to create opportunities for his son's talent. "Really, Dad? A real mural? What theme do they want?" "They left it completely open. They said they trust your creativity," Richard replied, excited to see his son's happiness. On the eve of the party, as the family made the final preparations, special visitors arrived. Ms. Mary's grandchildren had traveled again from a small town in Texas, but this time they were not just guests. They were an integral part of Michael's life. Lucy, John, and Anna Claire would spend the entire vacation in Los Angeles, living in the mansion and participating in summer activities alongside Michael. "Michael!" Anna Claire shouted, now 6 years old, running through the garden toward her friend. "I brought my painting supplies. Can you teach me how to do portraits?" "Of course, and I have an idea. How about we paint a mural together here in the garden, something that represents our friendship," Michael suggested, embracing her. John, now 8 years old, carried a real guitar, an early birthday gift that Richard had bought for him. "Michael, I learned to play Asa Branca. Can we do a duet tomorrow at the party?" "Perfect. I adapted the song for piano and guitar, especially for us," replied Michael, happy to see how music had become a common language among the children. Lucy, at 11, had become a talented artist under Michael's remote mentorship. She carried a portfolio of her own drawings, eagerly waiting to show her progress. "Michael, look what I managed to do," she said, opening the portfolio to reveal a series of portraits depicting rural life in a small town in Texas. "I used the shading techniques you taught me over video call." Michael examined the drawings with professional seriousness, pointing out technical successes and suggesting improvements with the ease of someone born to teach. "Lucy, this is amazing. You perfectly captured the light of the Texas countryside. Tomorrow I'll show you how to use pastels to create even more depth." As the children excitedly discussed art and music, the adults watched from a distance with emotion. "I never imagined I would see Michael like this," Claire murmured to Mary. "Happy, confident, leading other young artists. It's as if he was born for this." "He has always been like this inside," Mary replied wisely. "He just needed permission to shine." The birthday party the next day was an event that would be remembered by everyone present. 45 children from Michael's school attended, along with teachers, neighbors, and even some local journalists who had heard about the young artistic prodigy who had overcome extraordinary adversities. Michael mingled at the party without a mask, his scars visible but naturally integrated into his radiant personality. He conversed easily with adults and children, explained artistic techniques to interested peers, and played piano with the confidence of an experienced performer. "Everyone," announced Michael from the center of the garden, "I would like to dedicate a special song to the people who helped me find my true identity." He approached the grand piano that had been specially transported to the garden and began to play an original composition that told, through complex and emotional melodies, the story of his journey from isolation to freedom. The music started with dark and melancholic notes, representing the years of seclusion. Gradually, new themes were introduced. The arrival of Mary, represented by a warm and welcoming melody, the rediscovery of family, symbolized by harmonies reconciling, and finally, a triumphant theme celebrating friendship, art, and the possibility of a bright future. When the music ended, there wasn't a dry eye among the attendees. Claire and Richard embraced, moved to recognize how transformative it had been to allow their son to show the world who he truly was. "Michael," said Dr. Miller, who had become not only the family doctor but a personal friend, "this composition should be professionally recorded. It's a genuine work of art." "Thank you, Doctor. But you know what the best part is? I didn't write this music alone. Everyone here contributed to it in some way." Later, during the cake cutting, Michael gave a speech that surprised everyone with its emotional depth. "A year ago, I thought I would always be different, always isolated, always ashamed. Today I know that I am different, but that is my strength, not my weakness. My scars remind me that I survived. My art reminds me that I can create beauty. And my friends remind me that I can be loved just as I am." He looked directly at Mary, who was standing among her grandchildren. "Ms. Mary, you taught me that family is not just about blood. It's about who chooses to stand by us and helps us grow. Thank you for choosing our family." Tears flowed freely down Mary's face, but they were tears of joy and fulfillment. "And Mom, Dad," Michael continued, "thank you for being brave enough to change with me. I know it was hard to set aside fear and allow me to be happy." Richard and Claire approached their son and hugged him, forming a family circle that had been broken years before and was now finally complete. "We should be the ones thanking you, son," Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. "You taught us that true love means letting the people we love be who they really are." When the party ended and the guests departed, the extended family, Michael, Richard, Claire, Mary, and her 3 grandchildren, gathered on the mansion's porch to watch the sunset over Central Park. "Ms. Mary," said Michael, comfortably leaning against her, "what are we going to do tomorrow?" "Tomorrow, my angel, you will start preparing your mural for Malibu, and I will teach Anna Claire how to make real brownies, and Lucy will start piano lessons with you, and John will play guitar for all of us." "And then," asked Michael, "then we will keep living, one adventure at a time." Michael smiled, looking At the horizon, where the sky was painted with colors he was already mentally planning to capture in his next drawing. The boy who had once been a prisoner of his own scars was now flying free, his wings open to an unlimited future. Michael Taylor's story had become much more than a narrative of personal overcoming. It was a testament that true love, whether familial, fraternal, or communal, has the power to transform any prison into a portal to freedom. And in that moment, as the family contemplated the golden horizon of Los Angeles, they all knew that the true journey was just beginning. "You are very emotional,"